Good evening, everybody. I hope you guys are having a great day so far. Welcome to the November webinar with DLI. We're so glad that you're here. Just want to thank you guys for being here tonight. We've got a great guest speaker tonight. We're so thrilled about it. But before we do that, I want to get started with a few things to remind you guys. You guys are going to be starting a unit this week, and it's going to show you, you're going to have 3 weeks instead of 2, and you might be wondering about that. Well, we actually just want to give you an extra week for Thanksgiving. So if you are behind on any of your studies, you'll have an extra week to catch up. Or if you aren't behind, you can just take a week off and enjoy the holidays with your family. So that's what that's about if you had any questions. If you're finishing up Core 1 this semester, we would like for you to make a decision whether or not you are going to continue with Core 2 in the next few weeks. We hope that you would. It is such an amazing program and a great extension of what you're already learning. And if you're getting close to graduation, we will be talking more about graduation dates up in the next couple of webinars and into next year. I will go ahead and tell you that those dates for graduation will be June the 7th, and it will be at Calvary Church in Fort Worth, Texas, and that will be during our Destiny Gathering Conference, which is from June the 8th. June the 6th through the 8th, and we would love for you to attend that. It's family friendly. You can bring the kids, you can bring your spouse, and we have a great time of fellowship and speaking and worship, and it'll be a great opportunity for you to meet some of your instructors and your classmates and encourage and celebrate with the ones that have graduated. So we would love for you to attend that. We will be giving you more information in the next couple of months. After the first of the year, we'll open up registration and we'll be promoting it a lot. But it is a great time to get for you to meet all kinds of leaders and get connected. It's just a great time. It's such a big family. The Destiny family is just an amazing group of people, and you would be so blessed to attend. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Landon, and he will be talking to you about our speaker tonight. And I'm very excited, and I know you will be blessed. Have a great evening, and be sure to send me your questions in. You can comment on the chat if you have questions. You can email me at stephanie@destinyleadershipinstitute.com if you have questions that Landon will be fielding to Pastor John. And also, if you haven't already, please comment in the chat box that you're watching, and if you're having problems, email me again at stephanie@destinyleadershipinstitute.com. And participate in the live chat, you guys.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. What's up, DLI? Good to see you tonight. Glad that you are with us on this first day of November. Excited tonight. We have Pastor John Ragsdale in the house. He has probably the most amazing hair of anyone that I know, and he's keeping it covered up behind the ball cap. So it's really your disadvantage tonight, students. I do apologize. That's really the reason that we invited him on was the hair, and now he's put a cap on, and it's just really, John. I think I have this one. If you don't mind, you can go ahead and log off, and we'll just.
Good. Did you not want to see what's under this today? I spent the entire day riding in a Jeep, and it's not a good thing.
But on a serious note, John's probably one of my favorite communicators, one of my favorite speakers, other than myself, of course.
He's the same way about you and
me. He's a solid number 2, though. So,
I have myself listed there as well.
So we have Pastor John is with us. I do want to make one more brief note before we turn it over. I am headed to India on Friday with Pastor Jared Height and Pastor Amos McFalls, who are your fellow students, and they're probably on the live chat now. So we ask, first of all, that you keep us in our prayers, in your prayers. The Indian government, the last several months, has been increasingly difficult for Christians to get in and out of the country and things like that. So just pray that everything will go smoothly there. I have a chance to teach a master's course at a seminary there. I'll be teaching about 40 hours on the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. For those in the first semester, you should known that by now, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so I'm excited to do that. And then Amos and Jared will be there doing other things. So just keep us in your prayers. But the main reason I mention it, first, we really do want you to bring us before the Lord. But second of all, I'm the next 2.5 weeks, my access to internet and email may be somewhat spotty. So if you email me and can't get in touch with me, please know that I will get back with you as soon as possible. But to be patient with us as we go through that. This summer sometime, I believe it was in July, I had a chance to be with Pastor John at the Hills, Nashville, which is really the coolest church that I know, or one of the coolest churches that I know. It's an incredible place. God's doing amazing things, and he may share with you more in a moment about how much it's grown and just all that God is doing. But I spoke on Sunday morning. Then on Sunday evening, Pastor John led an all-in service, which is what they do for their leadership and for their core team, just to get them to buy into the vision. And he spoke something that impacted me so much personally, a word that I took so much from. I asked him, I said, Pastor John, you've got to do that for our students. So can you please share that again? So I'm telling you that because, first of all, I want you to know that it's a very good word. Second of all, I want you to know that this is nothing new that he's done. He did not prepare at all. He just warmed up.
I was in the Jeep all day. Come on, man.
So I just wanted you to be like, if you think, oh, that's amazing, just know that he did not come up with that anytime soon. It's been months in the making. He's been it several times by now.
Yes. Yes. Lots of tweets.
But Pastor John, please just take your time, share with us what you want us to know. I know last year you were with us, and it was one of the most popular ones we've ever done. So thank you for being back with us, and just take your liberty, say what you want to say, and I'll jump in as if I think of something.
Good. That's awesome. And since last time was so good, I all that stuff that you just said is a lie. I'm not doing what you asked me to do. I'm just going to read you the one I did because it was so good. I don't mess up. I'm joking. Landon was with us, and as he said, in our what we call our all-in night. And matter of fact, we just had one last night, and we do those periodically throughout the year. And it's really for our teams. It's our serve teams, the core people that are helping making the Hills happen. They show up on that night, and we have worship. We have some fun elements. And then we'll do a brief, what we call a culture moment, where 7 or 8 minutes, and then I'll share something. And Sunday night, Monday's a blur to me. The Sunday night was an amazing night for us as a church. I felt like that God had given me a word for our church, spoke that word to our church, and we've already started seeing fruits from it. So I'm excited. So my wife and I pastor a church in Nashville, Tennessee called the Hills. We have 2 sons. One's a freshman in high school. One's a freshman in college. And we planted the Hills 5 years ago in Nashville and just loving it. Matter of fact, we've got some DLI students that they ought to be tuning in right now. If not, then we need to have a really strong talk for sure. So I do want to just dive in, and I would love one of my favorite things about this is the Q&A, the questions that you all will submit. So I want to spend some time sharing something, and then I would love to spend some time answering any questions and maybe do some practical stuff. So before we start, I'm going to be reading from Matthew chapter 13, and so you can get ready for that. But before we do, I want to just pray over us right now. So Lord, I just thank you for this incredible opportunity, and I thank you for these students and so many people from so many backgrounds. And I'm honored, Lord, to speak to them today. I do pray that what has been prepared would speak right to where they are, and not just where they are, but where they're going and their future ministry. And Lord, I just thank you for DLI. I thank you for Destiny Ministries. I thank you for Landon and his family. I thank you for the Brassfields and their family and the heart that they have to raise up leaders I thank you for the local church, and I thank you for the leaders of the local church. I pray right now that you would prepare our hearts to receive what you want to say, and that you would allow it to do exactly what it's supposed to do in each individual. No way, there's absolutely no way that I can share something that would minister to such a diverse audience, but your Spirit can. And so I pray that your Holy Spirit would do what it does so well, that the word would do the work that only it can do, and it would not return void, in the name of Jesus. Amen. So Matthew chapter 13 and 44 is one of my favorite passages of Scripture, and I love when Jesus would use parables. I love how he just breaks it down and gives us examples. And this is one of those that stands out to me. It's Matthew 13 and verse 44. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. And it says this: the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. In his excitement, he hid it again, and he sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field. So the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered in the field. He gets excited, takes it, he hides it again, and then goes and sells everything he has, that he owns, to get enough money to buy that field. I think that all of us want the treasure. That's something that you hear a lot about. There's a lot of advertisement about the treasure. There's a lot of books about the treasure, how to live a successful life, how to get ahead in life, how to be debt-free, how to have a great marriage, how to raise good kids, how to have a successful business. And then for most of us, it would be how to have a successful ministry, how to grow a church really big, really fast, or how to grow a healthy church. So that is the treasure: relationships, businesses, community, school, church. That's what we put out there, kind of the carrot at the end of the stick. But what this passage speaks to me is that to get the treasure, we first have to buy the field. And I think that is a shortcut that most of us make, or would like to make, is we would like to just go straight to the treasure without buying the field. But if you're taking notes, I'd love for you to write this down. If you take the treasure without buying the field, there's a word that we call that. It's called stealing. You're a thief if you do that. It is illegal for you to walk into someone's field and take something in it. When I was growing up in Mississippi, we had a neighbor that had a watermelon patch in my grandma's house. And man, we love nothing better than to get over there in those hot summer days and steal watermelons from our neighbor. Well, he didn't take too kindly to that, and one day came out with a double-barreled shotgun. And luckily, he didn't aim it at us, but he did set it off. And I still get shivers when I eat watermelon to this day. Well, the lesson was, this is my field. You don't just come into my field and take what you want. And so for us to think that we can just get the treasure by just walking in and taking it without doing something to buy the field is wrong. And so I want that to be in your heart. I want that to be the filter for everything that we talk about for the rest of the night, is that there's a reason that God put the treasure in the field. See, finding the treasure is the easy part. I mean, that's the easy part. I mean, you can find it, but after we find the treasure, then we have to buy the field, which means selling all that we have. Going all in, which is a word that you've heard a couple of times tonight. Selling it all, going all in, and then after you sell it, take those proceeds, that profit, and invest it into that field. And my question is, and many times I question myself even as I'm preaching. And so my question, as I was studying for this, was, what would make someone want to do that? Why would you even want to commit to something that is going to require you to sell everything you have and invest it into a field? Well, it's simple. Someone that wants to own something. So ownership. I hope you're taking notes because you're all students. I want you to write that word ownership down and just underline it a couple of times. And I want to talk about what it means to be an owner. Because remember, this guy wasn't just a treasure hunter. He wanted to own something. He didn't just grab the treasure and run. He wanted to do it the right way. And let me just stop right there. I think one thing that is so important is that phrase, doing things the right way, the ethical way, the way that God has it set up. And that's very important for those of you that are starting out in ministry. I want to encourage you from the very beginning, do stuff the right way. Be under the right authority, do things in the right order, make sure that you're in alignment. There are a lot of churches and ministries that we look at and you think, man, that church had some incredible growth, or it grew really fast. But sometimes when you peel back the layers, you'll find that some of that wasn't done the right way or the ethical way. And then sadly, years down the road, you start hearing how that unraveled. That's why when you find a ministry like Destiny, or you find a ministry like the Brassfields, that they've done things the right way, you want to latch on to that, and that's powerful. So ownership. Everybody, right where you are, everybody say ownership. Come on, say it. Ownership. I want to give you a couple of points on what it means to be an owner. Number one, to be an owner, we must think like an owner. Ownership begins with a mindset. So let me give you two parallels. Many of you have rented a car before, I'm sure. And if you've never rented a car, I'm sure you know one that has. Maybe you haven't rented a car, but you've borrowed a car. What's the difference in a renter and an owner? I mean, I've rented cars before, and I'm going to tell you right now, when I get in that puppy, I want to see how fast it will go. I'm gonna go crazy in that thing as much as I can without getting in trouble. Well, it's because I'm renting that thing and I'm not owning it. Did you rent the car, or did you work to pay for it? There's a big difference. That's an owner mindset. A renter just walks into a church and they're just there for the Sunday, or they're there for a few days. They're there a few months to get what they can out of it. They're there so that ministry or that church or that business or that relationship can benefit them. An owner thinks, man, I put some blood, sweat, and tears into this thing. I'm going to make sure that I take care of it. When I was a senior in high school, I was 1 year after my year before going into college. I worked at Lofton's department store, and we had a sporting goods section, and that's where I worked. And we found out that the Jordan 4s were coming to our little department store in Brookhaven, Mississippi. And I remember I saved up my money, and when those things came in, I grabbed the first pair. I got a little discount because I worked there. I got the first pair, and man, I remember opening that box up. I could still smell them. And Landon, I spent my entire paycheck on those shoes. And man, I wore those shoes and wore them out. I had no idea that later on they'd become collector's editions. And for years I thought, man, I sure would wish I could get me another pair of those. Well, my son, who plays college basketball, came home the other day and surprised me. Evan now has a shoe guy. And so now I own a pair of Jordan 4, they're called the Cement 4s. And man, I opened those things up and I did the same thing. I just smelled of them. And I remembered that feeling of putting my entire paycheck down to pay for those shoes. Well, those were mine. I worked hard for those. It was like my first car, my second car, actually. My first car was given to me. My second car, I bought it. I worked for it. So an owner mentality is you think differently. You want to take care of things a little differently when you own it instead of rent it. There's also a difference in an employee and a son and a daughter. We're talking about having a mindset of an owner. An employee just thinks, I'm going to clock in, I'm going to clock out, maybe come a little late, maybe leave a little early. But a son and a daughter, they're not thinking about a paycheck. They're thinking about an inheritance. My wife's dad owned pharmacies, and he had 4 or 5 pharmacies. And so Kristen, my wife, is a doctor of pharmacy as well. And she would fly in every once in a while and do some relief work for her father. It became a standing joke for us that every time Kristen came in, when she left, her father would fire somebody. we would get so tickled. We were like, okay, you can just see the employees like, oh God, Kristen's coming in, everybody. And the reason is because her dad would suddenly see the difference in a son or a daughter and an employee. Because Kristen would walk in those doors straightening things and cleaning out closets that hadn't been cleaned out in months, because she was thinking like someone that was going to be an owner in that business. So how do you think about your world when you show up to serve at church? Do you think, well, let's just get this thing done so we can get out of here? Or do you think, man, I'm investing in this field because I want to be an owner in it? We need an ownership mentality. I would say that's one of the most important things as ministers and as students, as servant leaders, an ownership mentality. And sometimes you can, because you may not be the senior leader, you may not think it means as much, but more than likely there's going to be a day that many of you will be a senior leader. And I can tell you right now, the investment you're making in this field right here is going to end up bearing return in the field that you have one day. An ownership mentality. That word field in our text, when it says that he discovered a treasure in a field, went and sold all he had, and went and bought the field. That word field in the original Greek, and I'm always careful when I'm around Landon, when I start just chunking out Greek meanings, because I just know at any moment he's going, no, that's not what that means. You didn't dive deep enough. But I already tested this by Landon, so he's already heard this one time. That word field in the original Greek means land under cultivation. So the word field means land under cultivation. So here's what's important about that. That fellow didn't just take a shortcut across a field and stumble over that treasure. That guy had been cultivating that field. He had been working that field, and it wasn't his. Obviously, if it was his, he wouldn't have had to sell everything he had to buy. He was working the field for someone else. And in the midst of his working, and how many of you know if you have a treasure, you don't just lay it on the top? You don't bury it and just cover some dust over it. You dig it deep. So can you imagine the cultivation that's going on in this field? And you know how they cultivated those days. If they did have a plow and they have oxen, it's still, I mean, the beasts were doing the work, but it's still a lot of work. And I've actually been able to walk behind oxen pulling a plow. It is hard work, especially if you're digging deep, because you got to push that. So this guy was sweating. There were blisters and splinters. But when he found that treasure, it was worth all of that. We're going to find the treasure in the field that we're working in. You will find your treasure in the field you are working in. So what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? What do you want to see? Be faithful in the field that you're in right now. So in other words, this guy thought like an owner before he owned anything. While he was the staging guy that had to show up at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning and make sure the pipe and drape was right. While he was the custodian, he was thinking like an owner. I'll never forget when I told my dad that I wanted to go into full-time ministry, and I'd done some ministry and spoken some, but I told my dad, I want to go into full-time ministry. My dad was my pastor. And my dad said, that's awesome, son. He said, we were standing in the auditorium of our church there. And he said, I want you to come on to the back, come to my office. And I started following my dad and went back through that fellowship hall and opened his office door. We walked into that office door, and he walked by his desk, and then he walked into by his bookcase. And my dad's dad was a pastor as well, and he had some of his books there. And I was just so excited because I knew my dad was getting ready to hand me one of those books. And instead, he walked past all that into the bathroom, and he came walking out with a toilet brush. And he said, welcome to ministry, son. For 1 year, you are going to clean the church. And I did. For the next year, I scrubbed the toilets. I vacuumed the carpets. I made sure that place was spick and span. And I don't remember being frustrated about it, because I knew that at some point there was going to be an ownership that was going to take place. And now it's not the same church, but now I'm pastoring a church, and my dad is one of our leaders that is there. But it all starts with thinking like an owner before you own anything. Landon, anything before we continue on?
Yeah, you're doing such a wonderful job. But
thanks, Landon.
Yeah, I really love, how you're bringing out that so many of us, when we're getting into leadership, we want the treasure, but we're not willing to work the field that it takes to get the treasure, and that we really will find our identity, our passion, our destiny, our purpose when we're working in someone else's field. When we go about just doing what we should be doing. I believe it's Henry Blackaby, one of the books that our students read, that's like, don't go about trying to find God's will for your life. Just go about trying to find God's will in general. And in that process, you'll find your part in that. So rather than just pursuing, because there is this narcissism that accompanies our generation. Okay, God, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
How have you called me? What's my purpose? What's my gift? And if you just pull a plow, you'll find those things eventually. So I love how you brought that out, but then also how you can own the field, because now many of us would say, okay, well, the treasure's there, so I'm going to keep coming back to the treasure. I'm going to take a little bit here, take a little bit there. When the owner's not looking, I'm going to, I'm all about the treasure. I love how you bring it out. Like, the only way to get the treasure is just to buy in all the field. And what's so great about this is that the treasure itself, after you buy the field, you have the treasure, but it's still work to keep the field cultivated.
That's right.
Yeah. So there's so many
parallels to what you just said.
Yeah.
Great. I think we, you mentioned just a moment ago about, how do we become a me kind of very narcissistic. And I just did a message at our church talking about how when Jesus got ready to leave, he's looking at all of his disciples there, and instead of looking at each one of them and saying, I want this is going to work good with your gifting, this will work good with your personality, instead he said, hey, all of y'all, go into all the world, make disciples. So in other words, the mission statement that he gave was for everyone to go do the same thing, instead of trying to figure out who we are and what we're called to do and who we, so yes, I think it's about just go do the will of God, and then watch what you'll find the treasure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that, so to be an owner, we got to think like an owner. And then secondly, to be an owner, we got to act like an owner. I think it's easy for us to be thinkers, but at some point there's got to be some doing that goes on, and the doing is the hard part. I mean, that's not easy to be a doer, and that it's like my son's coach tells them. He says, look, if it was easy, everybody would do it. It's easy to think about it and say, I'd like to do this, But then to be an owner, we got to act like an owner. So there's three things I'd bring out on acting like an owner. One is investment. So if you're going to act like an owner, there's got to be some skin in the game. There's got to be some investment. Put some stake into it. And I'll explain that. In other words, if it goes great, then great. I'm all in. But if it goes bad, I'm still all in. And I would ask you this, the ministry that you're a part of, the community you're a part of, the family, we can go down the list. If it goes bad, are you still all in? You know, if the ministry doesn't just explode and take off, and if there's just not fruit happening everywhere and people being saved, are you still all in? Are you willing to buy that field? And I can tell you that for the most of the generation, when I say generation, I'm not talking about a certain specific set I'm talking about the age of this world right now. And the age of the church is, well, I'm just going to kind of check this out for a little bit. I'm going to see if it works for me. But man, an owner says, I'm putting stake in. I'm putting my own money into this thing. And you know, if it works out, I'm all in. If it doesn't work out, I'm all in. So that's investment. So I would encourage you to be an owner. Invest where you are. Invest in the field that you're in. Even if it's not your field, invest in it like an owner. Secondly, would be involvement. Not just investing, not just putting money. I can tell you as a pastor, there are people that will put money into something but won't put their blood into it and won't get blisters on their hands. And it takes all kind. But there is a mindset of some folks that say, well, I've got money would be the easiest thing for me to do instead of really the involvement. And what I tell our team is we got to get to a place that we say, this is our church. This is our church. And I know sometimes that sounds kind of weird because it's Jesus's church, but it really is ours. He paid for it and he gave the keys to it to the disciples. So it just takes us thinking and acting like owners instead of thinking and acting like a prodigal son or an elder son. When you read that story of the prodigal and the elder son, the issue with both of them was neither one of them thought like an owner. The prodigal takes his inheritance, runs away, spends it, and comes back and says, I'll just be a servant, Dad. And his dad's like, you can't be a servant. You're my son. And then the elder son gets upset because there's a party being thrown for the prodigal. He comes back in. He's all upset about it. And the dad goes, didn't you know that everything I have is yours? But because neither one of them thought like an owner, they weren't able to fully experience what the Father had for them. When you and I get an ownership mentality, where not only are we going to say, I'm going to invest in it, but I'm going to get involved. These are our people. These are my people right here. Claim them. I know there's some wacko ones that attend your church, but at some point, you've got to claim them. I tell our folks many times that we use the word team, but in reality, we're not a team. We're a family. And you know, sometimes you can't pick your family, but you're still family. Even if you disagree with them, even if you don't necessarily even like them, you're still family. And at some point, you got to claim them. As crazy as that uncle of yours is, there's a place you go, you know, we're family. I think the involvement thing is saying, these are my people. It's also, this is our culture. Like, this is how we do things around here. There's a culture that we have here. Your leader, your pastor, should not have to be the only culture keeper at your church or at your organization. That really should be you, and that should be me. We should be the ones that are bringing the new ones along, saying, hey, we don't talk that way around here. Or maybe a better way is, hey, this is how we would say that here. Or this is how we do that here. I had a conversation today with one of our leaders and there's a person that they're ministering to and trying to help along, and this person is incredibly talented, but they just come from a different way of doing things. And so I was helping this leader walk through that process of not cutting that person off because they're different, but bringing them along and teaching them culture. Also, I would say involvement is not just this is our culture, but it's also this is our calling. Our culture is why or how you do it. Calling is why we do it. And we've changed at our church. Instead of using the word vision, now we use the word calling a lot. And instead of using the word values, we use the word culture. So a calling and a culture. Because a vision is, this is what I see, this is where I want to go out there. A calling is something out there that's drawing you and pulling you. And so when you get involved, then you love the people, you love the culture, and you love the calling. And then the third way that I would say we act like an owner, investment, involvement, and then commitment. Just going, doing it, signing on the dotted line, making a statement saying, hey, Pastor, I want you to know I'm all in. I'm here. You can count on me. It's enough tire kicking. At some point you got to realize this is a good soil. This is good field. And there's a great treasure here. And I'm going to take on the responsibility of an owner. I'm going to think and act like an owner. I'm going to invest. I'm going to get involved. And I'm going to commit to that.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would bring out is that it seems like common sense. Like the man finds the treasure. He then goes and sells all that he has. But the selling all that you have, even if you know that it's something that could potentially be beneficial, is still a risk and a sacrifice, because we compare this story to the story of the rich young ruler who meets the ultimate treasure, Jesus.
Yeah.
And so he says, Jesus, I want to follow you. And Jesus says, okay, well, if you're going to follow me, keep the commandments. And the guy lies and says, I've kept all of them since I was young. I've never broken a single commandment. It's like, I've not made it through today without breaking one of the 10 commandments. I'm very doubtful that this guy has made it through his whole life without breaking any of them. And so Jesus said, okay, well, if that's how you want to play it, so you've got all the 10 commandments, then sell all that you have and give it to the poor. And it says that he walked away in great despair. I think that's how Luke puts it, in great despair. Now compare his great despair to the man who finds the treasure and goes away with joy.
So good.
To buy the treasure. Because one person recognized that, you know what? I found a treasure and it's going to be sacrificial. I'm going to lose some things. I'm going to have to give up things that are important to me, but I get the treasure in the end. And the other person said, look, I found the treasure, but I'm just not in a place yet to make any sacrifices to get the treasure.
To make that commitment. That's right.
Those are the two types of people.
Man.
That when we experience ministry, giftings and callings, when we experience what the local church has to offer, the impulse for all of us is like the rich young ruler. Like, I see it. I want eternal life. I want the treasure. I want the goodness, but it's just you're asking too much.
Yeah.
And the ironic thing is that the one who lost everything did it with joy, and the one who kept everything went away in despair.
That's so true.
And if you told me that I could be rich, I could be young, and I could have power, I could be a ruler, I would take that and think, well, those things equate to happiness. However, he had everything that this world thinks that we need and walked away in depression because he didn't have the treasure. That's where your character, he loses everything that the world thinks that he needs, but he does so with great joy because he realizes what he found.
That's so good. Man, I'm taking, are we recording this? I hope, because I want to go back and add my notes, and I will not give you credit. I'm just going to tell you right now. Any questions so far? Or do you want to wait to the end and do that?
We have one question that's came in, and we'll toss that to you and see if a few more will come in along the way. Someone wants to know, how do we make sure that the ownership doesn't go to a me mentality And I think I will nuance that. So we discussed a little bit about how ownership in general is not a me mentality. It's about the field. But there is probably an element that once you take ownership of something, then you personally begin to maybe get your value, your worth from that position. So how do we keep feeling as an owner away from becoming maybe a power trip for ourselves?
Well, I mean, I think the point of that is the treasure is a type of the kingdom of heaven. So forget the treasure, forget the field. It's about the kingdom of heaven. And that's the whole point of what Jesus is saying there is the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure. So once you and I understand that a kingdom, the word kingdom means the king's domain. So that's the domain of the king. It's not ours. It's not. There is no me mentality. This is God's work. These are God's people. And something we'll talk about here in just a moment is, as a pastor, I was convicted because I was using many times I would use how many fresh starts or how many people gave their heart to the Lord or were baptized or dedicated. I would use that as fuel for our team, the people that were serving. And I would say, because you're serving in the house of God, look at what's happening. And we would celebrate that almost as if it was our reward. And one day during my prayer time, I felt the Holy Spirit convict me and say, these souls are not your reward. They're my reward. I died for them. You don't take them away from me. And I felt like he spoke to me. He said, your reward is that I get you get to hang out in the house with me. You get to serve in this house. You were a nobody. You didn't have a name. All you had was sin and you had nothing. And I've called you to come sit at my table, not a slave, not even a servant, not just a friend, not just a son or a daughter, not just an heir, but a joint heir with Jesus Christ. That's the treasure. There's the reward. So at some point we have to come back to, this is not our house. That's his house. We just get to spend some time. We get to spend some time with him. And I think that's the beautiful part. And that's how you keep that mindset of not having a me mentality. And so just moving on, if we can think like an owner, we can act like an owner, then we get the rewards of an owner. On the field, you get the treasure. On the field, you get the treasure. And I just talked about a moment ago about souls and testimonies and while that's not my reward, I do get to share something in that. When just a few days ago we had someone share a testimony of how our church family has ministered to them and what it's done in their life. Well, I told our team, if you haven't served, if you haven't given, then when that person stands up and shares that testimony, there's some sadness. There should be some sadness because you can't share in that. But man, when you've been that person that's had an ownership mentality and you've been giving and caring and sharing, then you're gonna there's a sense of, man, I had a part in that. We're family. I will say that as a father, if I would have decided that I just wanted the treasure of good children, but I didn't make the commitment to buy the field of being a good father, then I would never experience what I'm experiencing right now. As I said a moment ago, we have a freshman in high school. Davis is his name. And we have a freshman in college, Evan. And Evan is a basketball player, and he's playing basketball. And it's a fun time. But I can tell you that Evan, my relationship with Evan is to a place that I could have never dreamed about. And my wife looked at me yesterday and she said, can you believe the relationship that you and Evan have? Because Evan and I are a lot alike. And he was not an easy child to raise. I'll just be honest with you. He's very strong-willed. And because of that, we butt heads. I mean, it was this thing that we would butt heads. And there were times I thought, man, are we ever going to have a good relationship? But there was a day that I remember Evan, I said something to Evan, he said something to me, and we kind of bowed up on each other like it was almost getting ready to go down. Like this is getting ready to be bad. And I remember one of those God moments where the Holy Spirit just calmed me down and said, you're acting like a man. And I didn't call you to be a man in Evan's life. I called you to be a father in Evan's life. And it shifted my mindset of even my wife, my relationship with my wife. There were many times that I would act like a man to her, you know. How dare you question, or I have needs, or whatever it is. Instead, God didn't call me to be a man in her life. God called me to be a husband in her life. That's the investment. There's that moment. And I preached yesterday at our church on the key to every successful relationship is submission. And that's a word that nobody likes to talk about. But it is that submission where a wife will say, well, I'm a woman, but I'm going to submit that role. I'm going to be a wife in this situation. Our husband to submit his role to his wife. Every relationship comes down to submission, but it's really investment. It's really saying, I'm going to sell my rights. I'm going to sell everything I have, and I'm going to invest it in that. Well, now the relationship that Evan and I have is because I made that investment in that field. And there's a promised return on our investment. That's the thing about the kingdom of heaven. It's not maybe one day. Luke 6:38 says, give and you shall receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, running over, poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. So this guy had an ownership mentality, and he also knew this principle, that if I go sell everything I have, I'm going to get the field and I'm going to get the treasure. And I think that's the power of this thing, is just having an ownership mindset that turns into an ownership action where we start acting like owners. And then we reap the reward of that.
Very good. And I think also another asset of the story, or facet of the story, is that, you know, obviously the present owner did not bury the treasure. Otherwise, he would have refused to sell it if he knew what was there.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was probably a previous owner, and so the current owner was unaware. And so what's striking is that then this servant in the field actually knows more about the land, digs deeper than the actual owner does. So sometimes as servant leaders, you know, we're always like, okay, well, I'm going to follow my pastor, and I'm only going to do what he does. And if he shows up late, then I'm going to show up late, or whatever it might be. But this servant actually dug deeper.
That's so good, man.
Than the owner of the land himself did. Because if the owner knew it was there, he wouldn't have sold the property at all. And so it's such an amazing illustration of that. I got a few questions coming in. Are you pretty wrapped up with the content, or do you want to make it some completely remote?
I mean, I can stretch as much as I need to, but I've got bonus material. But I think if you're good, I'm good.
Yeah. So let's comment quickly on. So when we say owning a field or owning or being an owner, we're saying that with the assumption that we don't actually own anything, that everything belongs to the Lord. Our giftings, our callings, they're God's, and He's delegated them to us. So we're not trying to say that we own the gift, or that, but really the point is that we behave like we are owners. But we always acknowledge that we don't really own anything.
Yeah, we're stewards.
Right.
You know, but I think that word steward is very important, because, you know, a steward would be the elite servant. So when you read the parable of the talents, he didn't just go grab anybody. He grabbed stewards, you know, stewards that could sign a check for him, stewards that could put the seal on it, stewards that could make decisions based on the will of the master, even though he was gone on a long trip. So there's a difference in a servant and a steward.
Yeah.
So I think a steward, I think stewardship would be a good word for that, especially when it comes down to the kingdom.
Yeah, very good. There's a question about the actual word for field. The question is the Hebrew word, but the New Testament was written in Greek, so the word there is I believe is agro.
Which I couldn't pronounce it. That's why I didn't say it.
Yeah, agro, which is where we get our word agriculture, agricultural. The same roots there. For
it literally means a land under cultivation or being used for pasture.
Right. Which is why we use it for agricultural and things like that. So same idea there. So as a leader in the area, so just say you're not the senior pastor, but you do lead a department or lead an area of the local church. How do you, what are some practical ways that you encourage those serving underneath you or with you to have an ownership mentality? Like what are some practical steps to get people to buy into that level?
I think Pastor Rick Bazette, if y'all don't know who Pastor Rick Bazette is, he's one of those guys. Yeah, you need to study him. He's an amazing man, pastors New Life Church in Arkansas. When I say Arkansas, I mean Arkansas.
The whole state.
The state. I mean, I think they're at 12 or 14 campuses now, and their goal is in the next 10 years to have 50 campuses in the state of Arkansas. But beyond that, and it was one of the fastest growing churches in America a couple years in a row. Beside that, and when you say those things to him, he'll say, don't talk about that stuff. Besides that, he is a man of integrity. He's a man of care. He's compassionate. He's loving. I just adore him. And one of the principles that they use at New Life is they give ministry away. And I love that. They don't try to hold on to it. They make sure that people have the culture. They make sure people understand what's going on. But at the end of the day, they give ministry away. And they're very serious about this, about how they do it and why they do it. And so I think that would be a key, is giving people some ownership to an area. And instead of lording over them, and that was a lesson I had to learn. I'm still learning it, because I like things done a certain way. I like them to look a certain way, feel a certain way. And I realized that in many ways I was stagnating our leaders by micromanaging them. And so, I think it's important that we don't become, even if you have a leader that's that way, well, that's their right. I mean, that's their leadership style. Then you can't fuss about it. But that doesn't mean that you have to lead that way. And so to find a way where you're explaining the culture and the calling to people, how we do it, why we do it, but then you're releasing them to have some ownership in that, and letting them reap the rewards as well. When the pastor comes and says, well, good job. Well, you don't take credit for that. Give them credit for that.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's the classical issue in leadership, is that often we want to give people responsibility without giving them authority.
Yeah.
And that's why people don't feel like they're owners, because if it feels like a to-do list or a task to be done, say, hey, what are your ideas here? How do you think this department would run more smoothly? If you were in charge, what would you do differently? Just allowing them to answer those kind of questions can get a long way in making them feel like owners.
Well, I think there's a fine line in that, Landon, and I've talked about it before, is that I've worked with people and for people that would give me responsibility but wouldn't give me the authority. And so I would go to do something, and then somebody would say, well, who said? And I have to go back over here. Hey, do you mind if we? Okay, back over here. Yeah. And so I would struggle with that. How do I have responsibility and authority? I think the key there is accountability. I think that's the tie-in to that, is to give people responsibility, give them some authority, but also they need to understand there's accountability there. And so what I tell our team is, I want y'all to take it and run with it, but just be ready for a pop quiz at any moment. Like, I may roll in the middle of a rehearsal or in the middle of whatever and go, hey, why are we doing this way? Or don't be offended by that. That's the accountability portion.
Right. Very good. So here's a question. How do we determine the difference between our work and what God wants our work to be? Do you just jump in and do the work and wait and see if the treasure is there?
I mean, I think yes. I don't think there's any other way. The only way, it's like Landon was saying, the only way you can figure out God's will for you is just doing God's will. And we know God's will is to serve. And we know God's will is to share and to give and to love. So yes, I think you've answered your question already.
Yeah, I think so too. I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on trying to find like the right spot, and certainly we'll be more fulfilled when we find that area where our giftings and God's will sort of collides. But really, no one has to tell you that you should go to do your church outreach on Saturday morning. Like feeding the poor is kind of a thing that's always going to be God's will.
Yeah.
Like no one has to tell you that if your church needs help with set up on Sunday mornings to do that, because serving the house of God is always going to be God's will. And so sometimes we can get so obsessed with this idea of like, well, I just need to find out what I'm gifted to do. And like, it's not like God's like, well, you know what? We really need the orphans to be cared for, but because you're not gifted there, that can wait. Like that's not your thing. Understand the orphans can just keep, you just stay over there. So I do think that as you continue to serve, and this has been my story, and I won't go into all of it, but like I've always felt like a round peg in a square hole in a lot of environments. So I just kept hanging around and kept trying stuff and kept doing stuff. And then eventually I found my niche and found where I belong. But the only way to do that really is just to be willing to serve wherever, to do whatever.
That's great.
So how do you respond when others misunderstand your ownership? When you know God has specifically given you an assignment, but others don't fully understand the vision behind it. So I think of like in context of this conversation, so you buy into whatever the vision is, you buy the field, you act like an owner, but others are like, man, that's kind of dumb. Like, well, why are you doing that? So how do you keep doing what God's called you to do whenever there are others that maybe even for good reasons seem to question or to misunderstand the vision?
Well, this is easier said than done, but you can't control what people think about you.
Mm-hmm.
God hasn't called you to control it. God's called.
All right. Well, it looks like.
Hey, Pastor John, Pastor John, can you unmute your microphone?
It says it's not muted.
Let's see. Okay, let me work on it. Landon, you talk.
Yeah, well, here's the good thing is that it is 7:30, and so what happened is I'd heard enough, and so we programmed that to happen just at that time. No, I'm just kidding, but it is 7:30, so we will wrap up here. But I do want to thank Pastor John so much for what I consider to be a life-changing word, if you take it to heart. And I think what I benefited the most from that is the idea of we want the treasure, but the only way to get the treasure is to buy the field, is to buy in to the vision. And so, Pastor John, just thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely. I don't know what happened. Everything froze for me, and I could hear y'all, but I could not respond.
Okay. Well, there is one final question. Would you like to? But you have to say yes before I ask you.
Then I'm not going to say anything.
You're frozen it. So,
I think I'm froze. What question is it?
No, okay. Well, here's a couple more serious questions, then we'll get to that one. Do you have any advice for someone slogging through a job that isn't ministry yet? In other words, like you're just digging. And that's the thing about this poor guy with a field. It's like we're really excited because that parable is all of one verse. Like
that's right.
We just get the good part where he finds the treasure. We don't know about the years of his life that he wasted waking up at 5 a.m., going to a field, sweating, crying, hating his life until he found the treasure. What would your advice be for someone who's just doing something they don't really feel called to or passionate about, but they just keep digging anyways?
I think it's, when the Bible says that when we get there, he's going to say, well done, my good, faithful servant. There's something about those three words. Just being a good person, steps of good people, order of the Lord, being faithful, just making it happen, and then having a servant heart. I think I tell especially the young folks in our church, I always tell them that the sweet life is if you can find something that you love to do and get paid for it. That's the sweet life. If you can earn a living doing what you love to do, if that's not an option, then do something to get paid that gives you the opportunity to do something you're passionate about. So if you can't get the two to become one, find a way. And so, yes, you may be serving, you may be working a job that you don't like. It's like you think, well, I'm so much better than this. I'm called to do this. Well, let me just tell you something. You're going to have that same fight battle within you when you get into full-time ministry as well. Because, man, well, I'm doing this, but man, I feel like I could do that. And well, what if this could get better? So there's something about just being content, being faithful over where you are, and always working to get better. If you can work to get a better job or move and progress, and then that's great. But there's that fine line of frustration and faithful that I think finding that balance in those two ends up being, that's the sweet life, I think.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we think that we're going to be judged by our fruitfulness rather than our faithfulness.
Yeah.
And that's not primarily, if we're faithful, we will eventually be fruitful.
That's
but
right.
who are we to deem what constitutes fruitful or not? Like I can't really control whether I'm bearing fruit no more than the tree can. But if I'm faithful, I will eventually be fruitful.
Well, and I'll say one more thing is that, I've seen in my life that every time my ministry would grow. Then when I would go to a new level, the ceiling of this level is the floor of this level.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can grow, and you, oh man, pop through and you're like, wait, new level. Wait, I just started over. Yeah. But in reality, you haven't started over. You're at another level. And I remember looking back on our ministry, I traveled, I kind of got to a level and then popped through, and it was like, what am I doing? Everything has started over, but I've learned that just being faithful, you just keep growing from glory to glory. The problem is that word two. There's the issue, that we like the glories, but the two is the tough part.
Great. Some practical ways to help us transition ownership to teams or ministries. So like if you're a senior leader or you have people serving underneath you, so to speak, what are some ways that we can make them feel like owners? That's
not an easy one for me. For me, it's quality time. It's spending time with those folks in their world. As our church have grown, that core of people that I can spend quality time with has gotten smaller. And so that's become my focus in a lot of ways, is pouring into those people, making sure they feel, I'm an encourager. That's my natural gift. And so I use that natural gift to encourage them. You're doing a great job. I'll get a great example is our worship team, Josh and Nicole Johnson. They did performance for all their career. They were on The Voice. They have they've been very successful as performers, but had never really led worship. And they've been leading worship at our church. Now they're full-time with us and just doing an incredible job. But that came through me encouraging every Sunday. Hey, Josh, Nicole, great job. Encouraging to walk in their anointing, but also they were very coachable. So every in between, we have 9 and 11, and after our 9 o'clock service, Josh catches me. What can we do better? What do we need to work on? And we spend some time. So I think it's a fine line of coaching and encouraging.
Mm-hmm. And we're very blessed to work for Dr. Phil Ragsdale, who just is the excellent owner / coach that will allow us to have ownership, but provide that constant coaching. And and that's what I've learned from him is that if you make people feel like they're the owner, they will do so much more.
Yeah, that's so good.
Than if they feel like an employee. Right. So from the very beginning, DLI has been mine, in the extent that it's mine until it violates or goes against the vision that he ultimately has.
Yeah,
so within the parameters, it's mine. Outside of the parameters, it's not mine anymore. And that is what makes this so wonderful, is that I'm very happy and proud to serve his vision.
Yeah, and that's the key there. The key there is serving.
Right.
And I use the word submission. I feel like this may answer one of the questions a moment ago. The word submission means to submerge your mission under another. And that's powerful. So there are going to be times you're going to feel this grating like, at some point you have to go, well, this is not my mission. And I'm going to take my mission and submerge it under that mission. Perfect.
So we're out of time here. So one last question. 2 people have different ideas for the same thing. So how do 2 people, they're both claiming ownership? Like they both like this is, the nursery is mine. The parking lot is mine. And there's disagreement.
The 2 most fought after areas.
Right. And these are purely hypotheticals. No one's ever done this before. But the children's ministry, the worship, whatever it is, there's 2 people, 2 different ideas. Both have taken ownership, which is better than someone that's not. But how do you, any conflict resolution ideas or inputs that you can give?
It feels like somebody's actually walking through that and they're asking that question. Well, let's give them an answer. And, that's tough without knowing. It's really tough to answer that question. I mean, at some point, that's the senior leader's job to make that call. And I've walked through that before, especially during a time of transition where we had 2 people kind of owning it a little bit. And I can just tell you, most of the time it doesn't end well. It just doesn't end well. And at some point, do what?
So thank you for the encouragement, Pastor John.
At some point, somebody's got to submit. At some point, somebody's got to go, you know what? There's one voice. We need one leader. And I without knowing the details, that's a tough one to answer.
Yeah, and I think it probably goes a lot back to your stewardship thought that you had earlier, is that if there is a problem, if you think of owner in terms of I own this is mine, this belongs to me, I'm gaining value and self-worth from doing this job, as opposed to, I'm stewarding the pastor's vision. And in that case, then it's ultimately up to the senior leaders, whichever direction he or she decides to go. But let me just add this though. That's actually a very good problem to have.
Yeah, it is.
Because most churches have the problem of no one caring.
Yeah.
So if 2 people care too much, that's probably a better problem and a better, an indicator of people buying in than the opposite problem of, like, well, I don't know, you park the cars this Sunday. I'm not coming. I'm sick. And that attitude really is more prevalent in churches.
Yeah.
So I would just be thankful that the other person cares enough to disagree with you. Like that's kind of a win.
And I would say to question, for this person, if whoever's asking this, if they're actually walking through that, or if they're viewing it, watching it happen, if you're the person involved in that, then it almost a little bit, it goes back to the Solomon principle. What happens if the baby's going to be cut in half? How would you react if you knew that you're either going to get your way or this thing is going to die? And I think that's at some point, there's your answer right there. It is easy to make it about us that's when we get in trouble.
I think, John, both you and I have had situations where we walked away from something that we might have been right about and said, "No, what? You take it."
Yeah.
And through that, God has blessed that, and God has blessed us.
Absolutely. And if the real treasure is, seeing God be glorified, having a healthy family, enjoying your life, living abundant life, if that's the real treasure, then sometimes it's worth it to just do things right, buy the field the right way, do things the right way.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And students, thank you for engaging. So as we wrap, we're at 7:45. Wow, that flew by. So the last question is, somebody wants you to sing something.
What?
Yes, something.
I
think it was actually Stephanie, but it was not Stephanie. Okay.
Like just out of nowhere?
Out of nowhere, whatever you want.
I don't even know what I would sing.
Wow. You don't always have a song in your heart, Pastor John?
Oh, I got you. Just went Jesus juke on me. I see how that went. I don't know. Whoever asked, like, what did you have a request? Do you have? I don't get asked to sing anymore. I'm a pastor.
Yeah. He has people that were on The Voice during his worship.
Yeah, that's right. They don't let me sing anymore. I just don't know. I mean, can I do that next time?
Next time. Next year, you'll have a song prepared beforehand.
I'll have a song prepared. You know what? I think last time I did a song, didn't I?
I think that's what it was.
That's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that song did really well. It did really well. It's like, most records go gold and platinum. This one went paper plate, and so
paper plate.
We're coming up on tinfoil, so it did very well.
Amos McFalls actually says Freebird, so
that's just because he likes chicken.
Okay, so Jared says, "I'll be home for Christmas."
Oh, Jared, I hope you are. Will you please come home? All right.
Love you, man. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, man. God bless y'all. Hey, my record's on iTunes. Y'all can go pick it up and hear me sing if you want.
Awesome. Hey, thank you guys so much for joining us, students. We will just be in touch. If you have any questions, please let us know. You guys have a great evening. Keep working hard.